Hey guys, so the topic of this video is going to be the one that you guys had voted on when I asked which topic you'd like to hear next. And it's actually a nice segue from the previous video I did, because in the previous video I touched on what women can do for their part in fixing modern society. And as with all things, it begins with us ladies working on ourselves, not the world. So I'm going to talk about the archetypes for the heroic woman that Julius Evola speaks about. So Evola says in Revolt Against the Modern World that a woman's heroism is passive and that there are two paths available to her, just as there are for men. So for men, he outlines the paths of the warrior and the ascetic. And for women, he refers to the archetypes of Demeter and Aphrodite, and this is what the discussion will be focused around today. So Demeter and Aphrodite are both Greek goddesses, and to a degree they represent the Madonna-whore dichotomy that women are often subjected to, although I don't really believe this is a dichotomy, even though I think most women will pretty clearly fit into one or the other of these archetypal roles. Rather, it's a spectrum. So you will probably see aspects of both in any given woman to some degree. For example, a woman might be like 80% Demeter and 20% Aphrodite, but will be most comfortable in a Demeter role despite having some of those Aphrodite characteristics. Additionally, external factors such as the nature of her husband may activate these characteristics in her. So a man interested in having a large family who represents a stable and guiding principle, who expresses the competitive male nature, who gathers sufficient resources and provides a foundational value system, may thoroughly activate the Demeter nature in a woman. A man who is a renunciant, an ascetic, who lives more in the realm of air and mind than of earth and body, who perhaps demonstrates his best attributes through his philosophical pursuits and his own transcendence, may evoke the Aphrodite nature in a woman, who sees the service of such a man to be supremely fulfilling because he's extraordinary. And since this is a spectrum and not absolutes, the male-female interaction can be various combinations of these archetypes, depending on the circumstance and the individual's inherent nature. So, what is passive heroism exactly? When Evola talks about passive heroism, he's saying that in order for a woman to fulfill her natural role, it must come through dedication to another being. This passive is an expression of pure devotion, of what he calls bhakti. It's a Sanskrit word, I think. Modern women who have built up this narcissistic cult around their bodies, or who try to be independent and have personalities, are killing the feminine within them. So in other words, women who want to exist and live for themselves end up destroying themselves because their inherent nature to serve another has no outlet. And turned inward, this so-called self-love is in the modern world just a euphemism for narcissistic egoism. And this naturally raises the question, what does it mean to be dedicated to another? So women in the role of mothers and lovers both uphold man in his role as warrior or ascetic. For Demeter, that will be her son. For Aphrodite, that will be her husband. Demeter is the archetype that probably needs the least explanation because it is the archetype of the mother and the housewife, and this is an image that, obviously tends to be exalted in the right wing. And when someone says they think women should be wives and mothers, this is the archetype that they're in touch with, this Demeter. Demeter lives for her children, she derives her purpose from them, and she is a nurturer at heart. The vast majority of women are going to be Demeter types, obviously, as child rearing is a key function of womanhood. Some may have elements of Aphrodite in them, but they are still fundamentally Demeters. And this applies even to modern women who have lost their way, believe it or not. We can see the nurturing of these lost women in their attachments to, pets or refugees, to pick two common examples, or anything else they feel needs to be taken care of. They may attract broken men who are in need of mothering in their relationships. When a Demeter woman doesn't have a child, she can become a destructive force. Just as in the Greek myth of the original Demeter, who caused widespread famine and loss of fertility after her own daughter was kidnapped by Hades. These women do not feel complete or fulfilled without children, and as such, they're also more prone to being overly attached to their children in ways that can be dysfunctional rather than nurturing. That is, if they're using their child for their own selfish ends, such as to get their emotional needs met, rather than always orienting towards what is best for the child in the way of altruistic dedication to their role as a mother. Now, Aphrodite is a more complex archetype, and it's a little difficult to talk about Aphrodite because of the association people tend to have of her as being a seductress, which she clearly was in her original mythology, but we're talking about an archetype here. Aphrodite is also a goddess of creativity and arts and is an inspiration to men. And I actually see the Aphrodite archetype, as Evola uses it, as an amalgamation of several Greek goddesses, including, perhaps Hera, who represents dedication to her husband, Athena, who represents dedication to wisdom and intellect, and so on. Aphrodite is what we could call an alchemical goddess. She's a woman who is an Aphrodite type will firstly be dedicated to her male partner. She's going to be a sidekick to his superhero, but she's also going to be his muse and intellectual companion. And I say she's alchemical because she will spur a man to change and transmute himself into something better. Aphrodite represents the ultimate challenge to a man's masculinity. An Aphrodite woman who is not on the path of heroism, though, is a corrupter of men and represents a great danger to them. But it is because Aphrodite has the potential to be man's greatest danger that she demands his greatest from him. And so she will usually seek to partner with a man who can rise to that challenge. Now, very few women are Aphrodite types. This kind of woman is someone who is going to be rather exceptional and unusual. She's often found in the arts or some kind of innovative endeavor. She will probably be highly intelligent because she needs to be able to mentally stimulate her partner so that he can grow in his own cognitive abilities and be challenged to think in new ways. She'll either work closely with him on some shared vision or goal or support him in that work in some way. And she may also have a lot of divine energy that she uses to spur her man on to spiritual heights that he wouldn't otherwise reach, which can be a reason that she might be a good partner to a man on an ascetic path. So one reason that there are significantly fewer Aphrodites than Demeters is that obviously Demeter is needed in a greater capacity for reproduction of the species, obviously. Another reason is that most men are not the type of men that would be right for an Aphrodite. The only appropriate partner for an Aphrodite woman is a very exceptional man himself. By definition of being exceptional, there's just not that many kind of people in the world. Aphrodite would be underwhelmed by the vast majority of men, but likewise, most men would probably prefer a Demeter woman unless they are particularly visionary in some way. None of this means you won't find Aphrodite mothers, however. They still tend to like children, and many of them often have children of their own, but where they differ from Demeter is they tend to be inconsistent caregivers. Their children are not the primary focus of their energy, no matter how much they might love them. They're not necessarily bad mothers, and in fact, some children's temperaments might actually be better suited to such a mother, but you don't see the nurturing devotion that you see with Demeter mothers who see their children's needs as primary. An Aphrodite woman will wither if she's put in a situation where she can't use her talents and is forced into repetitive, mindless tasks. And since many aspects of child rearing involve such tasks, endless piles of laundry, don't we all love that? These women don't tend to have a strong maternal urge, and this isn't to demean Demeters in any way, but merely to highlight the difference in their motivations and how these two different archetypes need different things out of life in order to reach their full potential. It's not really a case of one being better than the other because there's a role for both of them and they're not really in competition. They're serving men in completely different ways. So when looking at modern women, it might be tempting to think that a lot of these women who want to pursue careers are Aphrodite types because they don't seem to take motherhood seriously. But this would be wrong. In most cases, I would say they are still Demeter types. After all, very few of these career women are exceptional women by any measure, and therefore don't qualify as an Aphrodite just on those grounds. They also have the problem where they're kind of sucked into their own narcissistic cult of themselves and, therefore aren't in a position to inspire a man to his greatest. But also the proof is in the pudding when you see how many women give up their careers in their 30s because they've suddenly realized they want to have children. The reason it's hard to see their Demeter qualities, though, is because, we're a fallen people. So when we're talking about the archetypes of Aphrodite and Demeter, we are talking about two different expressions of what Evola calls absolute woman. Absolute woman is like a platonic form. It's the divine expression of femininity, and real women are just shadows cast by it. It's not a human conception of the divine, but rather we're just reflections upon reflections of that divine form. And on the path to heroism, we ladies should be aiming to be as close to absolute woman as we possibly can. And these modern women are so far removed from absolute woman that it can sometimes be hard to see the archetypes in them at all. These are women who have destroyed their femininity to the point that it almost can't be seen anymore. So instead of cultivating their femininity and what it means to be a woman, they've tried to imitate men and compete with men, but the irony is the men they are modeling themselves after are themselves so far fallen from the ideal of absolute man to the point that they can hardly be considered men any more than these modern women can be considered women. So in that sense, it's not even useful to use these fallen women as any kind of example of an archetypal expression because it's barely being expressed in them at all. Now, for women who are not so fallen, which I hope is every woman watching this video, those who want to aim higher and partake in the world of tradition once more, the first step is identifying which of the two archetypes best fits you. Now, odds are, statistically speaking, that you're probably a Demeter. But if that doesn't resonate with you, you could consider following the path of Aphrodite. But in many cases, a woman will struggle to figure out what her archetype is until she's with a man who can bring out her true nature. As I mentioned earlier, many modern women will express that they have no desire for children, for example, until they meet a man who is a stable and loving force, and then they find that their Demeter nature emerges. Or you might have a woman who's very talented but somewhat aimless until she finds a man who shares her passions, and she can combine her talents with his towards a shared vision that is probably going to be driven by him. So because of the passive and centrifugal nature of feminine energy, women need to find that force that puts a limit to their restlessness, and this is where men come in. This is the nature of the dichotomy between men and women, and this is why women's path is one of passive heroism. This dedication to the other rather than to the self is how women achieve fulfillment and their own potential, while the path of the mother is what's held up as the most glorious role for a woman on the right. The path of Aphrodite is still a legitimate traditional path as well. So I hope that helps clarify for you some of what I had kind of just touched on briefly in the previous video. And hopefully if you're a woman watching this and you want to aim higher, you now kind of have an idea where you should be aiming for. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks for watching.